Hello and welcome to WION World is One. I am Ghadi Francis and this is the West Asia Post, our weekly show where we bring you all the latest updates from the world's most volatile region. West Asia is on the boil once again. Iran and Israel are witnessing the rise of two new regimes, which is reigniting a decade-old conflict in the region. An attack on a tanker in the Arabian Sea has killed 2 civilian crew members. It appears to be the latest strike in a years-long shadow war that has now moved to the high seas. But it is the first time that civilians were killed, raising the risk of an overt war between the two foes.
Iran and Israel started out as allies, enjoying a good relationship for almost 30 years. But in West Asia, friendships don't last too long, and the two nations are the perfect example. From close allies, they turned into arch enemies, fighting a clandestine war across West Asia. But in the last few months, things have escalated. The shadow war has taken a dangerous turn. Tit-for-tat attacks are on the rise, and the covert war has moved to the high seas. The protagonists are playing with fire. Iran usually has an asymmetric advantage, but with Israel, they have been outboxed. For long, the battle was on the ground. But now it has shifted to the sea as well. There have been a series of mysterious attacks, mainly in the Red and Arabian Seas. In April, the Suez was attacked, an Iranian vessel anchored in the southern Red Sea. An attack on a tanker killed 2 civilian members. The tanker was related to an Israeli billionaire, and it was attacked off the coast of Oman. The first time civilians were harmed in this war. It is a classic example of retaliatory attacks, as the foes battle it out on the high seas. The theme of this conflict is brinkmanship. Both sides want to avoid a full-blown war, but neither of them want to look weak while doing it. While Israel has penetrated Iranian security when it comes to the seas, Iran has a geographical advantage. Tehran has denied any such attacks, saying that it wants to enhance security in the Gulf. Countries, on the other hand, say that Iran is threatening peace. As for Israel, they want Iran to be held accountable, and they're already shoring up their allies. CIA Director William Burns is in Tel Aviv holding talks with Iran high on the agenda.
Regarding the ship and on the issue of Iran in general, we are working to rally the world. But at the same time, we also know to act alone. Iran already knows the price we exact when someone threatens our security. The Iranians need to understand that it is impossible to sit placidly in Tehran and ignite the entire Middle East from there. That's over.
But this is not the only problem Israel has. Regional tensions are on the rise on its borders. There have been rocket attacks from Lebanon, and Israel hit back with retaliatory strikes, the first attack in 7 years on its neighbor. Both sides have targeted open land, a sign they did not want it to escalate further. But Iran-backed Hezbollah says that its actions could escalate in the future if the strikes continue in the region.
I also want to tell the enemy that we have open options, as I said before, the airstrikes if they happen. And I warn them that doesn't mean that we will respond to open land in Sheba farms. It could be at an open land in north of occupied Palestine. And from now, if any airstrikes target Lebanon, then all farmers and civilians at all of northern occupied Palestine to leave their lands. Our response might be at occupied Golan. Until then, we will assess and take the decision.
There are concerns that tensions could escalate into an overt war, a war between two of West Asia's strongest militaries. So how do they stack up against each other? Iran has 525,000 active troops compared to Israel's 170,000. Tehran's paramilitary forces comprise more than 1 million soldiers, while Israel has only a few thousand. Iran has also more tanks and a larger navy. But what could work in Israel's advantage is help from its allies. Iran, on the other hand, has proxies spread across the region. It is difficult to say who fired the first shot. For years, it has been a tit-for-tat conflict. But the war is heating up. This is now a full-fledged Cold War in West Asia, one that risks turning hot with a single wrong move. West Asia Bureau, WION World is One.
Like always, we'll continue to bring you all the latest updates from the heart of the conflict. Don't go anywhere, we have a lot more lined up for today. But first, as usual, let's take a look at what's making the headlines across West Asia.
Iran's supreme leader said that the COVID-19 pandemic was the country's #1 problem. Khamenei called for greater efforts to import and produce vaccines as Iran deals with the 5th wave of COVID-19 infections. Israel is set to approve the construction of new homes for Jewish settlers in the occupied West Bank, but the move will also grant permits for Palestinian housing constructions, a rare step aimed at tackling international and US criticism. Israel's government has issued new coronavirus restrictions, including sweeping implementation of a digital vaccine passport. Tighter restrictions are in place on mass gatherings as the country struggles with skyrocketing new infections. Saudi Aramco has witnessed its highest profit since 2018 as economies reopen across the world. The world's biggest energy company made a net income of $25.5 billion in the second quarter, boosted by a recovery in oil and chemical prices. Flash floods sweep through northern Turkey after the south was ravaged by wildfires. 11 people were killed in flash floods in Turkey's Black Sea region, in the second natural disaster to strike the country this month.
Lebanon is ending a fuel subsidy that has drained its reserves since the country descended into financial crisis. Now this move means that fuel prices will rise steeply. It comes as two separate brawls over scarce fuel in northern Lebanon left 3 people dead. Shortages in the West Asian nation have sparked a wave of confrontations at gas stations. We report about this crisis from the heart of Lebanon. Fuel subsidies in Lebanon are a thing of the past now, opening a new phase in the financial crisis that has cut the value of Lebanon's currency, throwing more than half the population into poverty. Since the onset, the central bank had been effectively subsidizing fuel. It uses its dollar reserves to finance imports at exchange rates. This happens well below the rates on the parallel market, thus draining the reserve of the bank. The central bank defended its decision to offer credit lines for fuel imports at market rates. It blames the country's non-existing government, saying it would need new legislation to use the mandatory currency reserve. The central bank's reserves have sunk from over $40 billion in 2016 to $15 billion in March. The fuel subsidy costs about $3 billion a year.
Whether or not the prices rise, I'm not thinking about that. I have a family. We rent. We have 1,000 things to pay for. No one is watching out for us. It's too much. We can't handle any more oppression.
Fuel shortages have forced motorists to wait for hours, sometimes for less than a quarter of a tank of fuel. Cars line up in the capital and cities across Lebanon, often waiting at stations before they open. For some, it is a daily quest with everything at stake. 2 separate brawls have left 3 people dead as fights at gas stations grow more frequent. Shortages have given rise to a vibrant black market, where fuel is sold at double the price set by the state. Lebanese officials blame the fuel crisis on smuggling to Syria and stockpiling by distributors seeking to sell at higher prices.
We've been waiting for an hour and a half, but those behind will be waiting for hours at the least. The wait, the oppression for petrol or for cooking gas. You have to wait for everything. They increase the prices and the lines increase.
Lebanon is currently in free fall. It is on the verge of national bankruptcy. The country is running out of fuel. Bread prices are rising, and the army needs funds to feed its soldiers. It is Lebanon's worst economic crisis in modern history, posing the biggest threat to its stability since the civil war. The currency has lost 90% of its value. Foreign currency reserves have dropped dangerously low, but the country is still functioning without a government. The ruling elite has failed to chart a course out of the crisis. They have been at loggerheads over how to parcel out seats, especially in the new government. This will replace the one that quit in the wake of last year's Beirut port blast. So, a financial meltdown, collapse of the Lebanese pound, sky-high prices for fuel, and anger on the streets. Lebanon is being hammered by one crisis after the other, and it looks like there is no end in sight. West Asia Bureau, WION, World is One. It is code red for humanity, with a climate catastrophe looming over the world, and West Asia could become one of the world's worst affected regions. Freak weather is becoming the normal here, with wildfires in Turkey and a drought-like situation in Iraq. We tell you more.
Blistering heat waves, bone-dry conditions, generational droughts, shrinking forests and polluted waters. This is the reality of West Asia. A land that is no stranger to conflicts, but seldom ones with nature. Global warming is not new here, but very little has been done to tackle it. From forest fires in Turkey to droughts in Iraq, freak weather conditions are the new normal here, and evidence suggests that there will be more to come. The new United Nations Climate Panel report says it is code red for humanity. A climate catastrophe is looming over our heads. And time is running out to act on the crisis. For years, wars were waged here for stability. But soon, this stability will depend on one thing. How will the region tackle climate change? Turkish authorities are battling the worst ever wildfires in decades. But the country has been accused of failing to prepare for the threat. Official data shows they spent only a fraction of funds that were allocated to prevent forest fires. The wildfires have been the worst in Turkey's history. 8 people have been killed in the fires, forcing the evacuation of tens of thousands of people, even briefly threatening to engulf a power plant.
If people understand that we are in trouble, and all of these forest fires and the droughts that we are having are significant signs that we are in trouble, then we will be taking a little bit better steps in that direction. But once again, Turkey's problem is not in mitigation, but in adaptation. Whenever I say we have to take serious steps, I mean adaptation. Mitigation is always secondary when your life is in danger.
Iran's Khuzestan province has long been a hotbed of instability. In 1979, segments of the population led a push for autonomy. Now, the unrest once again rocking Khuzestan. The province appears to be emerging as another major flashpoint, a picture of West Asia's ongoing struggles with water scarcity, highlighting the increasing hazards of climate change. For war-scared Iraq, the climate crisis is the next great threat. As Iraq bakes in the blistering summer heat, its farmers and livestock herders are battling severe water shortages. Shortages are killing their animals, fields, and way of life. The oil-rich country is one of the world's most vulnerable to climate change, struggling with a host of other environmental challenges.
The boats used to be able to pass through here, but as you can see, it is no longer possible. So we started transporting products and water on foot. It is very tiring. If the water supply remains the same, then the boats will not even reach here.
Another vulnerable water war hotspot is this: the Euphrates and Tigris River Basin. It flows through 3 countries, Turkey, Syria and Iraq. All of them want to use as much water as possible, and all 3 want to use the river for electricity, escalating pre-existing tensions in the region. West Asia and conflicts go a long way. Humanitarian crises here are the priority. But urgent issues can often eclipse a looming crisis. Currently, the region is distracted, blind to the long-term threat of climate change. But ignoring it will not make the climate crisis go away. With crucial resources running low, climate change will have to be higher up on the agenda. West Asia Bureau, WION World is One.
In Yemen, the conflict is triggering rapid deforestation. Yemen's forests are the new casualty in the 4-year-long war. More and more trees are being felled in the war-torn nation as the country relies on firewood for its resources and income. Let's take a look.
Ali Al-Amadi spends hours chopping down an acacia tree. His 12-year-old nephew helps out splitting logs on the side. In a country blighted by war, Amadi had to turn to logging, a new way of living in his northern Mahwit region. An economic collapse has wiped out the work he used to do. Earlier, the Yemeni lumberjack used to travel all over Yemen, but the war has wiped out most modes of earning. So, Amadi uses logging to eke out a living.
In the past, you used to go anywhere, like Marib Sadar Sana, and you would be able to make a living to feed yourself and your family. Now there is nothing. Now if you work for one day, it won't last you for 4 or 5 days of food.
With the demand for firewood soaring due to fuel shortages, there are concerns that the country's humanitarian crisis has now compounded the risk of deforestation, threatening both the environment of Yemen and any hope of a long-term livelihood for men like Amadi. Yemen has been mired in conflict since 2014. The war has killed thousands of people, and millions are running out of food and aid, plunging the country into one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. The fuel shortages are due to a coalition blockade on Houthi-held areas. This includes limiting access to the main port of Hodeidah. Businesses and families are now swapping diesel and gas for firewood. The alliance says that the blockade is needed to foil arms smuggling. Over 5 million trees have been cut across the north in the last 3 years. Around 886,000 trees are felled annually in Sana'a to feed bakeries and restaurants in the capital.
It's a huge number, but in 1 year, 886,000 trees are felled in Sana'a, which represents 10% of the country's population or the area. So if we multiply this by 10, the number becomes staggeringly high. Another study says that almost 17.5 tons of wood are burned by bakeries.
After gas was discovered in the Marib region in the 1980s, wood cutting became limited to remote areas. But the war has choked Yemen's energy output, forcing a reliance first on imports and now on wood. More trees are being cut down to build homes or furniture. Forests here in the country are largely privately owned. Poor families were traditionally allowed to chop wood for free, as long as they only cut branches and spared the trunks for regeneration. But now, several types of acacia, cedar and spruce are already vanishing. Lumberjacks are buying acacia from landowners for around $100, then selling it to loggers who send it to the cities. This is leading to rapid deforestation in the war-torn nation. Another crisis for Yemen to deal with in the coming years. West Asia Bureau, WION, World is One.
The Olympics have ended, but the Games are a sign of hope for many in the world, just like these refugees in Syria's Idlib. Inspired by the Games, they are participating in their own 10th Olympics. But here, no one is a winner or a loser. We tell you more.
Hurling a javelin, leaping over hurdles, and sprinting beyond rows of tents. Welcome to Tent Olympics, Syria's very own version of the Games. 120 boys from 12 different refugee camps, all huddled in the last rebel bastion of Idlib, each wearing the color of their camp. This was their turn to be star athletes. The 8 to 14-year-olds competed in a host of sports. The list was as long as the Olympics. From javelin to discus and football to even horse racing, the 10th Olympics included them all. 2 boys in white karate outfits squared off against each other. Another one appeared to act as referee in front of a small crowd. On the other side, there was Syria's very own version of the horse race. A boy ran as fast as he could, clutching a cutout of a horse's head to his chest. For the budding footballers, there was a soccer pitch edged in red earth.
I came with 10 other players. We had a lot of fun. I'm 12 years old and won second place in the long jump.
I played badminton and came in first place. We feel happy and at ease.
The Idlib region is home to 3 million people, most of whom have been displaced in Syria's 10-year-long war. They depend on humanitarian aid to survive, battling extreme weather conditions across the year. The 10th Olympics were aimed at giving them some hope, but they also plan to draw attention to their plight. This year, Syrians competed at the Tokyo Olympics as part of 2 teams, 6 on the national one representing the Damascus government and 9 on the International Olympic Refugee Team.
Through these Olympic Games, we search for hope to revive it and to also draw the attention of the international community to the plight of the children and the residents of the camps, hoping for a solution soon that will satisfy them after being homeless and away from their towns and environments for many years.
The Tokyo Olympics were a sign of hope for the world, a burning flame at the end of the tunnel, but the Games are not accessible to anyone and everyone. For Syria's refugees, all they have is their own version. Unlike the Games, everyone is a winner here at the 10th Olympics. West Asia Bureau, WION World is One.
That's all we have for you on this episode of the West Asia Post. I will see you next week with a brand new lineup, bringing you more stories from the world's most volatile region. Until then, stay home and stay safe. I am Ghadi Francis, and you're watching WION World is One.